we are going to be going over the patch notes and talking a little bit about the state of the game. I have my friend here who's been here for a few videos,
Hello.
who's been playing the game right alongside me. Uh, so far, looking over the patch notes, we seem to think that this is probably the best patch they've released. I think now is a good time to go over a state of the game and talk about like stuff that's been added recently. So first off, they added some new planetary effects in blizzards and sandstorms, and then they increased the level cap to 150, which I think is a little crazy that they went that high. I wasn't expecting that much. I was expecting like maybe 100 or 75.
That bodes well for the future of stratagem unlocks, though.
Yeah. I can't imagine what a level 150 stratagem unlock will be. Next, they changed some missions, specifically the Retrieve Essential Personnel, which is one of my most hated mission types, honestly. They moved the enemy spawn rates farther away from the center, and there are now fewer civilians required at higher difficulties. They changed the Destroy Command Bunkers. There are now more locations for them, which makes sense because you have to kill, like, what is it, 19 bug holes at like the high end, but
But
you only
it's not blitz. It's a different thing. It's the you have to go in and do the terminals on them. They're like that, but it only comes with like 2 at all difficulties that you
yeah,
unlock
but
it.
like comparable is like the bug blitz. You had like you'll
Yeah.
have like 15 bug holes and then like only a couple of those. It didn't make sense to me. Another good thing is the objective modifiers have been halved on their negative effects, which is very needed, I feel. Some of them got a little crazy. 100% time on some of these was like way too much. It makes it actually bearable sometimes. And the fact that it affected the ship call-in was ridiculous. A 4-minute extraction was a lot to ask sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the best change for it, but a 4-minute extract is like all that does is just takes
Oh
two
wait,
minutes off the timer for you.
this one says 50.
Yeah, it should be call-in time increased by 50% now, and it should be strategy
Oh
cooldown
yeah,
by
cooldown's 25, call-in time's 50. Yeah, I misread that. Okay, but those are far more bearable than some of the other things that we had. The 100% call-in time could make some of them kind of ridiculous. The
kind of crapped on some of the quick call
yeah,
orbitals.
yeah, that's kind of tucked in at the middle of balancing, but can be easy to miss. But that's probably the biggest change and most important change in the entire patch notes, in my opinion.
It's huge for feels.
Yeah. Then we get on to the weapon balancing, and they did a lot of stuff here. They touched the arc thrower. They kind of buff nerfed this, which is a little strange that it got nerfs to me, because it was pretty weak considering that there was a primary in the game right over here called the Blitzer, right? Isn't it Blitzer? It's under shotguns. Yeah, the Blitzer, which is basically what it was, but like light. So the fact that they nerfed it is a little crazy, but it did get increased stagger force, which means that it's gonna be staggering stuff pretty well. And then they stabilized the charge time on it to 1 second, which is
I think it was
fair.
to just clean it up more than anything, make it just feel more stable as a weapon. Because it kind of had this like weird like skill floor, skill ceiling thing where it's like if you knew that it had a shortened charge time, you could get way different effectiveness out of it as somebody who didn't know that. And so it kind of like divided the community on whether or not it was even good. I don't know how I feel about increased stagger force on it. It's kind of it was already good enough. Like now it just stun locks enemies too.
The difference between like the Slugger and the Punisher is pretty noticeable on that, and I think the increased stagger force is probably overall a really good thing for it. It gives it more of a place as a horde control. It
Yeah.
loses about 15 meters of range, but its range was ridiculous anyways, and I don't think you're ever gonna really notice that too much.
most people weren't actually making use of it at that range. Like, if you're making use of it at 50 meters, like,
It was really
cool
hard.
down.
It was really hard at that range, anyways, because it didn't really lock on at that range, so you had to be hitting it yourself. I don't think the nerf is actually gonna be very noticeable on it. The next big thing is a buff that is not gonna matter at all because they didn't address the core issue, which is the guard dog. The original guard dog got buffed.
Gun dog.
It now replenishes its ammo from supply boxes.
Yeah, all of it instead of just a portion of it, which I think it had like 25% effectiveness.
Yeah.
And like, it's still not a shotgun, so I still don't care.
It's not the laser. It is not going to compete on that level. Just use the laser. This is the one change that I don't understand what they were hoping to accomplish with it. Next up, we have the anti-material rifle getting a substantial damage increase, but I don't think it's going to make the hugest change. It moves it out of like a D tier to maybe like a C tier or a B tier. It's definitely useful for early players. But
I think it can jump up to B with some skilled usage. I think it now probably one shots every Devastator on a weak point shot, and I think it takes significantly less time for it to functionally kill heavier enemies. Like, there was a thing where people would try to figure out how many shots it would take to kill a charger by shooting it in the big bubble butt, and like what this says is 70% of that, which I think means it only takes a single magazine dump into a charger's butt to kill it, which means it's only going to take like 5 rounds into the heat sink of any heavy automaton to kill them.
it's definitely going to be noticeable. It's definitely good. It's no longer one of the worst weapons you can be using out of everything here. I don't see it making
a crapware state.
I just don't see it like breaking into any sort of like super meta relevance right now. Next up, we have two changes we're going to discuss together because they kind of impact each other. We have the Breaker Incendiary getting increased damage per bullet by 5, which, do you know how many bullet pellets these have?
21.
Yeah, so that's 105 damage added to this thing, which is quite a bit.
If you hit with every pellet,
Yeah.
which is, first of all, that's a big ask. Like, the spread on this thing is goofy crazy.
But this damage puts it over the Spray and Pray, which my one issue with it before was that the Spray and Pray had more damage. This makes it more bursty than the Spray and Pray. With similar ammo, I think this makes it just a better Spray and Pray.
I mean, it definitely has less ammo per mag and less overall reserve ammo by that, like, by proxy of that. But
the big deal, though,
they're now competing.
the big deal, though, is that now incendiary damage overall has gone up, which is a big change to a support weapon called the Flamethrower that was already really, really good and a sleeper pick this last patch. Extra 50% burn damage is crazy for this weapon because that's all this weapon is burn damage, burn tick damage.
So that, I know this is primary, secondary, and support weapons, but this is actually a stratagem buff too that should have kind of been mentioned in a couple of the stratagems, because this affects like 4 stratagems at this point. This affects Flamethrower, which is now just like turbo crazy. This affects the Napalm Eagle Strike, which is rock solid already. Like, it's
I have been
enough.
thinking this is a very good take for defensive missions because they also fixed the enemies like caring about the fire because they didn't used to care about. They used to just walk right over it.
Well, because they knew they weren't taking any damage. This also buffs the incendiary anti-personnel mine stratagem,
Which were already pretty solid too.
which I kind of already like quite a bit, but now that the incendiary damage does so much more, I'm pretty sure that's just like a, hey, screw you, no man's land like, stratagem now.
And the thing nobody talks about is Orbital Laser gets buffed by this. Because Orbital Laser
That was the
leaves
last
fire.
thing I was about to say.
Yeah.
Holy crap, Orbital Laser goes absolutely ape with this.
Yeah.
Now here's the other thing, okay? This is also a nerf to Helldivers. Because there are enemies that deal fire damage on the automaton side of things. One of them is a Hulk. The other is based off of the little burn barrels.
Surviving
That
a
explode?
Hulk flamethrower, though, is asking a lot.
Yeah, but now it just absolutely, definitively is death touch. Like,
Yeah.
if it pokes you, you explode. Like,
The next thing that got changed is something that a lot of people are going to be really happy with. It doesn't really affect performance too much if you were already good at it, but the Liberator Penetrator now has full auto. That's solid, not necessarily a buff, that's more of a quality of life. The next thing we have is the Jar Dominator got to go a little crazy. Got to go a little crazy. This and the Diligence Counter Sniper have had a huge glow up this patch. The Dominator got 100 damage and stagger, which I'm gonna be real, it didn't need the stagger on top of that to be really good.
And the lightly did, but now it's like, whew.
Yeah. And then the Diligence Counter Sniper got medium armor penetration, which I think was the one thing both me and you agreed. If this thing had medium armor pen, it was amazing into bots.
Now it's just good. Not even just
Yeah.
into bots. Now it's just actually like a good, solid option for somebody who wants to like sit back a little bit. Because it having medium armor penetration, it already has a higher fire rate than the base Diligence. So now you kind of just have a like almost Liberator Penetrator with like triple the shot damage.
If you were a fan of the Liberator Penetrator, I would recommend switching to the Diligence Counter Sniper at this point. The full auto buff on the Penetrator is nice, but you're almost tripling your damage.
I think they just basically get to operate as like, hey, what range do you want to play this game at? Options.
That's the only issue I have with the Counter Sniper, is that the sight on this thing is kind of crazy. It zooms in a lot, even at the lowest tier. If you like to do that full zoom, which is pretty much how I play all the time. The Slugger got some pretty heavy nerfs. So, it lost stagger, it lost 30 damage, reduced demolition force. They did fix the penetration tag in it, which is nice. Well, they have 2 lists on here for fixing the armor pin tag. I don't know why they have 2 of them in there.
They probably didn't even think about the fact that they mentioned it specifically and then mentioned it like holistically.
Either way, it lost
the other 2 options.
It lost demolition force, stagger, and 30 damage. Depending on how much stagger was reduced, because I haven't actually tested it, this could be a very, very heavy-handed nerf for a weapon that kind of got pushed out with the new pass. And you're going to notice that one of those things is missing from these patch notes. They didn't even hit the 2 best weapons in the game at the time, if you ask me.
Yeah. There's a pair of monsters in this game that did not get touched, and
they hit the Slugger. And they hit the Slugger.
The Slugger was good. So what the stagger is about now, doing a little digging and testing on my own, is it kind of feels like the Liberator concussive.
That's not terrible then. So it's definitely been dethroned as the like best rifle type weapon in the game now. I think that probably belongs to the Counter Sniper or the Jar, depending on your preference. But
it's marked as a shotgun, but it's a heavy rifle.
But it goes from like S to like A minus B plus tier, I think, at this point. The 30 damage is quite a bit on it.
I think the 30 damage is another one of those things like we were talking about earlier. This is just one of those things to increase consistency for it, where it like sometimes you would shoot a Hive Guard in the face and it would take 2 shots, and then sometimes it would take 3. Now it's just like guaranteed to take 3.
Yeah. It's still a strong weapon, but they went a little heavy-handed when they didn't even touch the other problems in this patch.
Yeah.
They cleaned up the UI a little bit with the some stuff not showing medium armor pin. The recoilless and the spear now get 1 extra ammo per supply box, which is very nice, but there's another weapon that you should be taking over recoilless rifle, and spear, as far as I'm aware, still has not had its tracking issue handled.
And honestly, even if it does, Quasar is just you're using Eats or Quasar. Like, if you're using recoilless, you're using it because 2 of you are using recoilless, and you're just backpack swapping to just saturate an area. But even at that point, it's like there's nothing in the game that requires that much firepower in 7 seconds. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then the final weapon pass is on one of the new ones that was introduced, actually. The heavy machine gun. This looks like a nerf. I think it's more of a buff, though. The highest fire rate was 1,200. It has been taken down to 950. I think that makes it a lot easier to control. Even though it's kind of a nerf, this thing had some insane accuracy, and you would dump your clip very quickly. This helps with ammo conservation in the long run, and realistically, most things were only going to survive 1 bullet anyways. So you didn't need that high of a fire rate.
They didn't mention anything on here about fixing the way that the red dot sight, like, is way off center, but, you know.
They did quite a few things, though, to the Patriot exosuit. So it should feel a lot stronger now, a lot more healthy. Rockets now only penetrate on direct hit, which kind of a nerf, but I think that's how they were supposed to be anyways. But they also cleaned up damage from some mobs on top of it, cleaned up some health scaling, cleaned up some rockets, not double tapping it or triple or quadruple or however many times they were doing it. They didn't specifically specify how much it was doing it. They also did that to Helldivers. So this thing is going to feel a lot more tanky, which was my initial problem with it, was that they died very, very quickly. Enemies got changed a little bit. Like I said, chargers, they do less damage to exosuits. Bile and nursing spewers do less damage with the acid they spit out, which is a huge deal. It was hard to survive them when they initially hit you, so now that's going to mean that you probably almost always survive unless you just stand there and take it, which you shouldn't be doing to something like that. The next big thing is Battle Titans can no longer be stunned, which...
Sad. Big sad.
I don't know how they expect us to handle a bunch of them all at once anymore, because the way you would be handling those was like dropping a 500 and then just stunning them. I get the change, but it does make the bugs a little bit harder to deal with. They kind of needed it, though, when compared to bots. Shriekers can no longer call breaches. Neither of us actually knew that they could do that. That's a little insane that they could. And their dive bomb is doing less damage, which means we can no longer do the funny haha of dive bombing one of them into a Bile Titan. It was insane that that could kill a Bile Titan, though.
Very useful.
Very, very useful. Armor got changed. Every tier you go up from light gets 5% more damage reduction, basically. Might not do a ton, but I can see the usefulness of it here and there.
Yeah, it's just probably to clean up the expectation of damage from players, because it always sucks when you're like, oh, I should survive this. You just don't, for some reason.
There are some miscellaneous fixes here and there, like the explosion bug I mentioned. Automatons weren't spawning Devastator types properly. Just a few things here and there. Another thing was they changed the ballistic shield to make it so you would take less damage overall, because your hitbox was showing really weirdly. They still have some known issues in here, like players can't unfriend other players, befriended via friend code, stuff like that. Stuff that doesn't really matter as much.